Let me make clear that I initially supported the rebellion, seeing it as part of the Arab Spring. The more the media ignored so many important factors, claiming that NATO destroying the Libyan armed forces and introducing special forces on the ground were legal and in fact warranted, when all of this escalation of warfare would guarantee feuds lasting years and a horrible psychological scar on all people in the country, all because of the drumbeat of self-congratulation and this orgy of violence. Gross exaggerations of whitewashing and minimization of lynching gross exaggerations of war crimes largely disproved on the side of the loyalists, who were being murdered by the bushel, and whitewashing and minimization of lynching of blacks by the rebels. America's current foes in the war on terror being trained and armed by the West to overthrow a secular government. The media seems an instrument of U.S. warfare. The UN resolution that we ourselves drafted, one would assume would be an obligation that we swore to uphold, to obtain a ceasefire and use the African Union to negotiate peace. By insisting Gaddafi had to go, we created logical absurdity. How can one talk to someone who is not there? It is as if a wager was made by the Western leaders over how many legal and moral violations they could commit with impunity. And how can a country with a poverty rate near 20%, the United States, a crushing debt largely generated from military expansionism, a suspension of its Bill of Rights through the Patriot Act, whose very interpretation is top secret, and who has ruled that any American can be assassinated without trial on the grounds of national security? How can a state like that speak of a small country's ruler having lost his moral authority? We abdicated ours in October of 2001. Congressman Dennis Kucinich and many others have called the NATO activities international gangsterism. With 5% of the world's population, we have 25% of the world's prisoners, 33% of the world's ex-felon, 47% of the world's military spending, and about $1 in every $6 of our economy is now military and national security related, 400% what it was prior to the Cold War. We see a behemoth armed to the teeth, a soft dictatorship, which an unscrupulous leader could trigger into something akin to Nazism. So, for the moment, I ask you to consider the Libyan Jamahiriya, however wrong-headed, as a culture we have chosen to destroy. And Churchill's remarks about the unprovoked invasion of France remind me of what is now happening to Libya. I wonder what Churchill would think of Britain bullying a small, weak country using a campaign of aerial terror, after England was subjected to the same. And that as NATO realized that they could not hide, or as Bush said, misunderestimated the level of resistance to the attack on the standing government by the very colonial powers who held her in bondage in some ways until 1969, they have now allowed a ruthless campaign of reprisals by jihadists, our sworn enemies, now our Orwellian allies. In other words, the NATO countries do not want people to think that Gaddafi had support. Therefore, they are permitting, and wink and nod, to a ruthless campaign of silencing people, erasing information about burials and war crimes, erasing information that would lead to their own liability. Now, I would like you to listen to Churchill's words about Hitler's attempt to erase French culture completely, and realize the Western powers would very much like to do this over and over, claiming Libya would make a splendid template for future operations, and a very hawkish new State Department official is being appointed to look at Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, and any country not under our sway in the Americas. Winston Churchill said, "Hitler's method, I must remind you, is to get one country shut up with him alone." On the complete annihilation of a small country's armed forces and government, he had this to say.
This evil man, this monstrous abortion of hatred and defeat, is resolved on nothing less than the complete wiping out of the French nation and the disintegration of its whole life and future. By all kinds of sly and savage means, it's plotting and working to quench forever the fountain of characteristic French culture and French inspiration to the world. All Europe, if he has his way, will be reduced to one uniform boshland, to be exploited, pillaged, and bullied by his Nazi gangsters. You will excuse my speaking frankly, because this is not a time to mince words. It is not defeat that France will now be made to suffer at German hands, but the doom of complete obliteration. Army, Navy, Air Force, religion, laws, language, culture, institution, literature, history, tradition, all are to be effaced by the brute strength of a triumphant army and the scientific low cunning of a ruthless peace force. Frenchmen, rearm your spirits before it is too late. Never will I believe that the soul of France is dead. Never will I believe that that place among the greatest nations of the world has been lost forever. What we ask at this moment,
Dieu protège Libyans. Thank you, good luck, and I should have one last closing remark. I've worked as hard as I can for 5 months to expose the hypocrisy, mendacity, and downright incompetence of those in charge of this policy. Once our country reestablishes something like sensible leadership that does not trample on our own people's rights and prosperity, those who have committed these unprovoked acts of patricide, that is, death of a nation, should face trial and receive the sentence others have received for unprovoked, naked invasion of a small, weak country. How can we congratulate ourselves when we outnumber these people militarily 500 to 1? And again, I should say, none of the statements I have made are not based on multiple credible references. So if you want to know what's likely to happen in Libya, either the TNC will establish a system of patronage, stop persecuting the loyalists, and reintegrate them into society, or as their present behavior indicates, they will have a civil war that will rage for years. And even if they do the former, I don't see how they can prevent a civil war from raging for years, due to the extremely poor execution, especially by the media and NATO, rather than allowing them to abide by the ceasefire provisions. Thank you. Good luck and good night.